The crystalline towers of the Zenthari Imperial Palace gleamed beneath twin suns, their prismatic surfaces casting rainbow patterns across the marble floors of the Grand Assembly Hall. Princess Kalira stood at the observation deck, her arms crossed in a gesture of barely concealed frustration, as she watched the parade of suitors below. "Your Highness?" Chancellor Vextar approached with his usual obsequious shuffle, his scaled hide shimmering with nervous perspiration. "Lord Kethrin of the Mining Guild has requested another audience. His dowry offer has increased substantially." Kalira's violet eyes flashed with annoyance. "Tell Lord Kethrin that I am not a commodity to be purchased." Her voice carried the melodic quality of her people, but with an edge sharp enough to cut crystal. Below them, alien nobles from across the galaxy postured and preened. The Kethmori delegation flexed their multiple arms in displays of strength, while the gas-breathing Nethys floated in their containment suits, communicating through bioluminescent patterns. Each sought the hand of the most eligible princess, in the Empire driven by politics and profit rather than passion. "But Your Highness," Vexitar persisted, "the Emperor expects you to choose soon. The stability of the Eastern Territories depends on a strong alliance. I know what my father expects." Kalira's tone could have frozen the palace fountains. "But I will not be bartered away like cargo shipments." She turned away from the Chancellor's protests and found herself studying a quiet figure seated apart from the main gathering. Unlike the other suitors who wore elaborate ceremonial armor or flowing diplomatic robes, this one dressed simply in earth-toned fabric. He appeared to be human, a relatively new species to galactic politics, with sun-weathered skin and calloused hands that spoke of honest labor. "Who is that?" she asked, gesturing toward the solitary figure. Vextar followed her gaze, and his expression soured. "That is Elias Thornfield, Your Highness, a farmer from one of the human agricultural colonies. I'm not certain why he was included in the diplomatic roster. Some clerical error, no doubt." Kalira watched as Elias carefully tended to a small, potted plant he'd somehow smuggled into the formal gathering. His movements were gentle, reverent even, as he adjusted its position to catch more light from the crystal windows. There was something peaceful about him that stood in stark contrast to the political machinations surrounding them. "Arrange a private meeting," she said suddenly. "Your Highness, surely you jest. A human farmer? The scandal alone would do it." Her voice brooked no argument. 3 hours later, Kalira found herself in the palace's meditation gardens, face to face with the most unlikely suitor in Imperial history. Elias stood respectfully as she approached, but didn't perform the elaborate genuflections expected of other petitioners. "Your Highness," he said simply, his voice carrying a warmth that reminded her of summer rain on mountain peaks. "I'm honored by your invitation, though I suspect I'm out of place here. Please sit." She gestured to a bench beside a flowering vine native to her homeworld. "Tell me, Elias Thornfield, what brings a farmer to the Imperial Court?" He smiled, and something in her chest fluttered, a sensation she hadn't experienced with any of the supposedly suitable nobles. "Honestly, my colony's administrator thought it would be good for diplomatic relations. I think he was trying to get rid of me for a few weeks." His honesty was refreshing after days of flowery speeches and political maneuvering. "And what do you grow on this colony of yours?" "Grain, mostly. Some vegetables. We're trying to adapt earth crops to alien soil compositions." His eyes lit up as he spoke about his work. "There's something magical about coaxing life from reluctant ground, watching something small grow into something that can feed families." Kalira found herself leaning closer, genuinely interested. "You speak of it like poetry." "Maybe it is in a way. Every seed is a promise, every harvest a small miracle." He paused, studying her face. "But forgive me, Your Highness. You didn't invite me here to discuss agriculture." She was quiet for a long moment, watching the way sunlight caught the gold flecks in his brown eyes. "What if I did? What if I'm tired of discussions about trade routes and military alliances? What if I wanted to hear about promises and miracles instead?" Something shifted in his expression, a recognition of the loneliness behind her words. Then I'd say that even princesses deserve to hear about beautiful things. When she returned to her chambers that evening, Kalira's mind was made up. The court erupted in scandal when she announced her choice the next morning. Nobles whispered behind jeweled fans, questioning her sanity and her father's reaction. But as she watched Elias accept the traditional consort crown with quiet dignity, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Peace. The wedding ceremony 3 days later was a study in contrasts. Ancient Zenthari traditions performed, before a gathering that included some of the galaxy's most powerful figures, all there to witness a princess marry a farmer. As Kalira placed her 4 hands over Elias's 2 during the binding ritual, she caught something in his eyes, a depth that seemed to hold secrets. But in that moment, surrounded by political chaos, she chose to see only the gentle man who spoke of miracles and growing things. She had no idea that her simple farmer had once been something far more dangerous than any of the warriors who had sought her hand. The morning light filtered through the crystal walls of their shared chambers, casting prismatic patterns across Kalira's sleeping form. Elias watched her peaceful expression, marveling at how different she looked without the weight of imperial duty on her shoulders. Her violet skin seemed to glow in the early light, and her forearms were arranged gracefully across the silken sheets they now shared as husband and wife. 3 months had passed since their wedding, and each day brought new discoveries about the woman he'd married. She was brilliant, compassionate, and carried a loneliness that matched his own. What had begun as mutual respect had blossomed into something deeper, something that made his chest tight with an emotion he'd thought himself incapable of feeling. Kalira stirred, her eyes opening to find him already awake. "You're watching me sleep again," she murmured, a smile playing at her lips. "Guilty," he admitted, brushing a strand of her silver hair from her face. "I still can't believe you chose me." She rolled closer, her body warm against his. "Even after 3 months of sharing a bed, you doubt my judgment?" Her touch sent familiar fire through his veins as she traced patterns on his chest with delicate fingers. Despite their different anatomies, they'd found ways to bring each other pleasure that left them both breathless and amazed. Last night had been particularly intense. Kalira had whispered his name like a prayer as he worshipped her body with reverent hands and lips. "Never your judgment," he said, capturing one of her hands and kissing her palm. "Just my worthiness." "Let me be the judge of that," she whispered against his lips before kissing him deeply. Their morning intimacy was interrupted by Chancellor Vexitar's announcement chime. Kalira groaned against Elias's shoulder. "Duty calls." "Always does," he agreed, though his hands were reluctant to release her. An hour later, while Kalira attended her morning council sessions, Elias made his way to the palace gardens. The staff had grown accustomed to his presence there, though many still whispered about the princess's strange choice in consorts. He didn't mind, let them think him a simple farmer who'd stumbled into royalty. The garden had become his sanctuary, a place where he could work with his hands and quiet the memories that sometimes surfaced without warning. He knelt beside a bed of struggling Terran roses, examining their leaves with practiced eyes. "Nutrient deficiency," he murmured, making mental notes about soil composition adjustments. "You speak to plants now?" Elias looked up to find Captain Thainris of the Palace Guard watching him with barely concealed disdain. The Kethmori officer had made no secret of his disapproval of Kalira's marriage. "Sometimes," Elias replied mildly, returning to his work. "They're better conversationalists than most courtiers." Thainaris's forearms crossed in a gesture of aggression. "You make a mockery of this position. The princess deserves a warrior, not a dirt scratcher." Elias's hands stilled for just a moment, a tell that would have been invisible to most observers. But he caught himself, continuing his gentle ministrations to the roses. "She deserves whatever makes her happy." "Happiness?" Thainaris laughed harshly. "This is the imperial court, farmer. Happiness is a luxury we can't afford when enemies surround us." Something cold flickered in Elias's eyes, but his voice remained calm. Perhaps, if more leaders pursued happiness instead of conquest, there would be fewer enemies. The captain stalked, away muttering about naive humans and political disasters. Elias watched him go, his mind automatically cataloging potential threats and defensive positions, habits that had kept him alive through campaigns that would have broken most soldiers. That evening, Kalira found him on their private balcony staring out at the city lights below. She slipped her arms around him from behind, pressing her cheek against his shoulder. "You're troubled," she observed. "Just thinking." He turned in her embrace, studying her face in the moonlight. "Kalira, why did you really choose me?" The question had been building for weeks. There were moments, fleeting glimpses when she looked at him as if trying to solve a puzzle. Her intelligence was formidable, and he sometimes wondered if his carefully constructed facade was beginning to crack. "Because you're kind," she said simply. "Because you see beauty in growing things. Because when you touch me, I feel cherished, rather than conquered." Her hands traced his chest, following old scars he'd explained away as farming accidents. "Because you're exactly what I need." But as she spoke, her fingers lingered on a particular mark, a knife wound from the Kepler campaign that no farming tool could have made. He saw the question in her eyes, the analytical mind working behind her loving gaze. "And because," she continued softly, "I sense there's more to you than you show the world. Depths you haven't shared with me yet." His breath caught. "What makes you think that?" She smiled, but there was something knowing in her expression. "The way you move when you think no one's watching. The fact that you somehow know exactly how to calm my anxieties about court politics, as if you understand strategy and conflict better than any farmer should. The way your eyes go distant sometimes, like you're remembering things that don't match your gentle farmer story." Elias felt a familiar tension building in his shoulders, the hypervigilance that had kept him alive in a dozen war zones. She was too perceptive, too intelligent. He'd chosen his cover carefully, but he hadn't counted on falling in love with someone who could read people like tactical manuals. "Does it bother you?" he asked carefully. "Not knowing everything?" Kalira considered this, her violet eyes serious. "Everyone has secrets, Elias. What matters is whether those secrets will hurt the people I love." She cupped his face in her hands. "I trust you. Whatever you were before you came here, whoever you were, I trust that you won't let anything harm our people or our love." He kissed her then, pouring all his gratitude and guilt into the contact. She'd given him exactly what he'd been searching for: acceptance without full disclosure, love without complete vulnerability. He should have felt relief. Instead, as they made love under the alien stars, he felt the weight of his deception growing, heavier with each whispered endearment, each trusting touch. Kalira deserved honesty, but honesty would shatter the peace they'd built together. As she fell asleep in his arms, Elias stared at the ceiling and tried not to think about the intelligence reports he'd seen earlier, buried in routine agricultural updates, suggesting increased Kethmori military activity near the border worlds. Some secrets, he told himself, were worth keeping, even from the woman he loved, especially from the woman he loved. The state dinner had been proceeding flawlessly until the lights went out. Kalira had been mid-conversation with Ambassador Velthara about trade agreements when the palace's crystal illumination system suddenly died, plunging the grand dining hall into near-total darkness. For a heartbeat, there was only confused murmuring from the assembled diplomats and nobles. Then the screaming started. Muzzle flashes erupted from multiple entry points as armed figures in dark combat gear poured into the hall. The distinctive whine of Kethmori plasma weapons filled the air, followed by the wet sounds of bodies hitting marble floors. Kalira found herself pressed against a pillar, her formal gown torn, and her heart hammering against her ribs. Through the chaos, she could see the systematic nature of the attack. This wasn't random violence, but a coordinated assassination attempt. The attackers moved with military precision, targeting specific individuals while herding others into kill zones. "Your Highness," Chancellor Vexitar appeared beside her, bleeding from a gash across his scaled forehead. We need to reach the safe room. A plasma bolt took him in the chest before he could finish the sentence. Kalira watched in horror as her father's oldest advisor collapsed, his body convulsing once before going still. Well, well, a familiar voice echoed through the hall as the emergency lighting finally activated. Captain Thaneris stepped into view, no longer wearing his palace guard uniform but instead clad in Kethmori battle armor. Princess Kalira, you've been very difficult to isolate. The betrayal hit her like a physical blow. Thaneris. Why? Because your little farming experiment threatens everything we've built, he sneered, gesturing to his fellow conspirators as they finished securing the hall. The Kethmori have offered the Zenthari a true alliance, one built on strength, not sentiment. But first we need to clean house. Kalira's forearms shook as she pressed herself against the cold stone. Around the hall she could see the bodies of diplomats and courtiers, people she'd known since childhood, cut down like wheat before the scythe. Where is your precious farmer husband now? Thaneris continued, raising his weapon. Hiding in his garden while real warriors decide the fate of empires. Right behind you. The voice was quiet, almost conversational, but something in its tone made every head in the room turn. Elias stood in the main doorway, apparently unarmed and still wearing his formal dinner attire. But something fundamental had changed about him, his posture, his bearing, the way he held himself. Thaneris laughed. The dirt scratcher arrives. Come to watch your wife die? No, Elias said, moving with fluid grace toward an ornamental weapon display. I came to take out the trash. He reached for what appeared to be a ceremonial sword, a ornate blade meant for decoration rather than combat. The moment his fingers closed around the hilt, transformation was complete. The gentle farmer vanished. What remained was something else entirely, a predator in human skin, radiating a lethality that made the armed assassins take involuntary steps backward. When he moved, it was with the controlled violence of a man who had turned killing into an art form. The first attacker barely had time to aim before Elias was inside his guard, the ceremonial blade singing through the air. Despite its decorative appearance, the sword found the weak points in Kethmori armor with surgical precision. The assassin dropped, clutching a throat that would never speak again. Impossible, Thaneris breathed, but he was already bringing his plasma rifle to bear. Elias flowed like water, the ancient sword weaving patterns of death around him. Each movement was economical, deadly, beautiful in its efficiency. He didn't fight like a soldier. Soldiers were taught to survive. He fought like something that had transcended survival and found peace in violence. Kalira watched in stunned silence as her gentle husband systematically dismantled a force of trained killers. The man who tenderly cared for roses now moved, with the grace of a predator, anticipating attacks before they came, flowing around defensive positions like smoke. A plasma bolt grazed his shoulder, burning through expensive fabric to reveal a patchwork of old scars. He didn't even slow down. You're Terran Special Forces, Thaneris realized, his voice climbing with panic. But that's impossible. The record said what I wanted them to say. Elias's voice was arctic calm as he advanced on the captain. Did you really think your little intelligence network could penetrate human military files? The sword took Thaneris in the center of his chest, punching through advanced armor like it was paper. As the captain fell, Elias turned to survey the carnage with professional detachment. 7 attackers, 7 bodies, 0 survivors except the intended victims. The transformation was so complete that Kalira almost didn't recognize him. This wasn't her husband. This was something that wore his face but moved with the confidence of a man who had walked through hell and emerged, unburned. Elias? Her voice was barely a whisper. He turned at the sound, and for a moment she saw something terrible in his eyes. A darkness that spoke of battles fought in places where mercy was a luxury and compassion a liability. Then slowly, recognition dawned, and the killing machine began to recede. Kalira. He dropped the sword, the weapon clattering against marble as he rushed to her side. Are you hurt? Did they? Don't. She held up a hand, stopping him just out of reach. "Don't touch me, not yet." The words hit him like physical blows. She could see the pain in his expression, the desperate need to comfort her warring with understanding of what she'd just witnessed. "I can explain." "Can you?" Her voice was steady, but he could see the tremor in her hands. "Can you explain how a farmer moves like a killer? How a gentle man knows exactly where to strike to sever arteries? How my husband became someone I don't recognize?" Around them, palace guards were finally arriving, their weapons drawn and faces grim. They looked at the bodies, at Elias standing over them with blood on his clothes, at their princess backed against a pillar with shock written across her features. "Your Highness," the guard captain said carefully, "are you safe?" Kalira looked at Elias, really looked at him, seeing past the facade for the first time. The calloused hands she'd thought came from farming now revealed themselves as the product of weapons training. The quiet confidence she'd attributed to rural simplicity was actually the steady nerves of a professional warrior. Even his posture had changed, shoulders set in a stance that spoke of readiness for violence. "I don't know," she said finally, her violet eyes never leaving his face. "I honestly don't know." The medical wing of the palace had never felt so cold. Kalira sat on the examination table while Elias tended to the shallow cuts on her arms with steady hands, his touch as gentle as it had always been. But everything was different now. The hands that moved with such careful precision had been sliding a blade between armor plates less than an hour ago. "The burns aren't deep," he said quietly, applying a healing gel to a plasma graze on her shoulder. "They'll heal cleanly." His voice was the same, warm, concerned, loving. But she could see the tension in his shoulders, the hypervigilance that hadn't been there before. Or maybe it had been, and she'd simply been too trusting to notice. "You have field medical training," she observed, watching how he worked. "Real training, not the basic first aid a farmer might know." "Yes." "The scars on your body, they're not from farming accidents." "No." Kalira caught his chin with one hand, forcing him to meet her eyes. "I need the truth, Elias. All of it. Who are you?" For a long moment he was quiet. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of buried history. "My name is Elias Thornfield." That part was true. "But I wasn't always a farmer." He moved to the window, staring out at the city lights below. "I was born on Earth in the North American Republic. When I was 18, I enlisted in the Terran Defense Force, Special Operations Division." Kalira felt something cold settle in her stomach. Special Operations. We were the ones they sent when diplomacy failed, when the regular military couldn't handle a situation, when someone needed to disappear without a trace. His hands clenched at his sides. "I was very good at my job." "How good?" He turned to face her, and she saw the full weight of his past in his eyes. 43 confirmed kills in active combat, 17 deep cover assignments in hostile territory, 6 years of active service before they sent us to Kepler 442b. The name meant nothing to her, but the way he said it suggested it should. "What happened on Kepler 442b? War. Real war. Not the clean conflicts the politicians like to imagine." His voice grew distant. "The planet was home to a mining colony. Human. Civilians caught between two alien factions fighting over rare Earth deposits. We were sent to evacuate non-combatants and establish a neutral zone." Kalira watched him carefully, noting how his breathing had changed, how his hands unconsciously moved to positions that would allow quick access to weapons. It didn't go according to plan. Plans never survive first contact with reality. The bitter laugh that escaped him was nothing like his usual warm chuckle. The Velnari had deployed bioweapons. The Thenori responded with orbital bombardment. The colony was caught in the middle, and the only evacuation ships were 3 days out. He walked to the medical cabinet, ostensibly organizing supplies, but really just needing something to do with his hands. "My unit, 12 of us, held defensive positions around the colony for 72 hours. We were outnumbered 50 to 1. How many made it out?" 2. The single word fell like a stone into still water. Myself and Corporal Davis. Everyone else died buying time for those evacuation ships. Kalira felt tears prick her eyes, not just for the story, but for the man telling it. The man who had carried this weight alone for months while playing the role of her gentle farmer. Elias. After Kepler, I couldn't be that person anymore. The Terran Defense Force offered commendations, promotions, more assignments. I turned them all down and requested discharge. He finally turned back to her. I wanted peace. I wanted to grow things instead of destroying them. I wanted to wake up without automatically cataloging threats and escape routes. So you became a farmer. I tried to. Spent 2 years on an agricultural colony, learning everything I could about soil composition and crop rotation and rainfall patterns. And it worked, mostly. The nightmares faded. The hypervigilance lessened. I thought I'd found a way to bury the soldier. Kalira slid off the examination table, moving closer to him. But you couldn't completely bury him. No. His laugh was self-deprecating. You can't spend 6 years as a professional killer and just turn it off. The skills remain. The instincts remain. The ability to evaluate threats and calculate the most efficient ways to neutralize them. It's all still there. She studied his face, seeing the guilt and shame he'd been carrying. Is that why you hid it from me? Because you thought I couldn't love a soldier? Because I thought you deserved better than someone with blood on his hands. The words came out raw, honest. You wanted peace, Kalira. You chose me because I represented something simple and clean. How could I tell you that your gentle farmer used to slip through enemy lines and cut throats in the dark? The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken fears and realizations. Finally, Kalira moved to stand directly in front of him, her 4 hands reaching up to frame his face. You think I'm that fragile? She asked softly. That naive? I think you're good. Pure in a way I stopped being a long time ago. And I think you're an idiot. Her tone was gentle, but her words were firm. Did you think I chose you randomly? That I didn't have intelligence reports on every suitor who requested an audience? Elias went very still. What? I knew you weren't just a farmer, Elias. I didn't know the details, but I knew you had training, experience, probably a military background. What I didn't know was the extent of it. She traced the line of his jaw with delicate fingers. What I chose to ignore was how much you were hiding. Why? The question was barely a whisper. Because I could see the man you were trying to become, the man who spoke of miracles and growing things and treated me like I was precious rather than powerful. Her violet eyes searched his face. Because I fell in love with both versions of you. The gentle farmer who tends my garden, and the deadly protector who saved my life tonight. Hope flickered in his expression, fragile and desperate. Even knowing what I've done, what I'm capable of, especially knowing, she pulled him closer, her body warm against his. Do you think I wanted some pampered noble who would crumble under pressure? Do you think I wanted someone who couldn't protect what we're building together? Before he could respond, she kissed him, fierce and claiming and full of the passion that had been building between them for months. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. I need you to promise me something, she said against his lips. Anything. No more lies. No more hiding. If we're going to face whatever comes next, we face it together. All of you and all of me. He nodded, unable to speak around the emotion in his throat. When he finally found his voice, it was to whisper the words he'd been afraid to say. I love you, Kalira. Both the princess and the woman. I love you enough to be whoever you need me to be. I don't need you to be anyone else, she replied, pulling him toward their bed. I just need you to be honest about who you are. As they came together with desperate intensity, Kalira marveled at how complete she felt. Her gentle farmer and her deadly protector, unified at last. Outside their chambers, the political situation would require careful handling. But tonight belonged to them, to truth, to trust, and to the love that had grown strong enough to survive revelation. 2 weeks after the assassination attempt, the Zenthari Imperial War Council convened for the first time in 50 years. Kalira stood before the assembled generals and advisors, her husband at her side, no longer hiding what he was. The intelligence reports are conclusive, General Morthak announced, his cybernetic eye whirring as it processed tactical data. The Kethamori have been building military installations along our border for months. Last night's attack was just the beginning. Emperor Zethkar, Kalira's father, studied the holographic displays with a grim expression. How many ships? At least 40 battlecruisers, possibly more. They're using stealth technology that makes accurate counts difficult. And their ground forces? The Emperor asked. Unknown, but substantial. They're clearly planning a full-scale invasion. The room erupted in concerned murmurs and tactical discussions. Kalira watched her father's face, seeing the weight of impending war settling on his shoulders. Then she felt Elias's hand touch her back, a gentle, reassuring pressure. Your Majesty, Elias said quietly. May I? Every eye in the room turned to him. For months he'd been dismissed as the princess's peculiar choice in consorts. Now, after word of his actions during the assassination attempt had spread, he was regarded with wary respect. Speak, the Emperor commanded. Elias moved to the tactical display, his trained eye immediately identifying weaknesses in the enemy positioning. The Kethamori are making a classic mistake. They're assuming superiority in numbers equals victory. But their formations are designed for overwhelming weaker opponents, not for sustained conflict against prepared defenses. He manipulated the holographic display, highlighting specific points. Here, here, and here. They've concentrated their forces around 3 primary staging areas. It's efficient for rapid deployment, but it makes them vulnerable to coordinated strikes on their supply lines. General Morthak leaned forward, his interest clearly piqued. You're suggesting preemptive action? I'm suggesting we use their overconfidence against them. Elias's voice carried the authority of someone who had planned operations in hostile territory. Small teams, surgical strikes, focused on logistics rather than direct confrontation. Disrupt their supply chains, eliminate their communication networks, force them to react instead of acting. Guerrilla warfare, the Emperor mused. You have experience with such tactics? Kalira watched her husband's face, seeing the shadow of old memories pass across his features. Yes, Your Majesty. Extensive experience. What followed was 3 hours of detailed tactical planning. Elias transformed before their eyes, shedding the last vestiges of his farmer persona to reveal the strategic mind beneath. He spoke of insertion, points and extraction routes, of supply interdiction and psychological warfare, of the 100 small details that determined whether such operations succeeded or failed. When the session ended, the Emperor approached them privately. Where did you find him? He asked Kalira. He found me, she replied, squeezing Elias's hand. Or maybe we found each other. The Emperor studied Elias with new respect. I owe you an apology, young man. I thought my daughter had chosen poorly. You thought she had chosen a farmer, Elias replied. She did. She just also chose a soldier. 3 days later, the first strike teams deployed. Elias had volunteered to lead one of them, but Kalira had vetoed the idea with imperial authority and wifely determination. You're too valuable as a strategic asset, she'd argued, and too valuable to me as a husband. Instead, he coordinated the missions from the palace war room, his tactical expertise proving invaluable as reports flowed in from the field. The Kethamori supply lines began to collapse under precisely targeted attacks. Their communication networks went dark. Their invasion timeline, so carefully planned, began to unravel. It's working, General Morthak reported after a week of operations. Their forces are pulling back from advanced positions to protect their rear areas. Phase 2, Elias announced, manipulating the tactical display. Now we make them think we're preparing for direct assault. Massive troop movements, fleet positioning, all the traditional preparations for conventional warfare. But we're not? Kalira asked, though she already knew the answer. We're going to let them come to us, draw them into our space onto our terms where their numerical advantage becomes meaningless. The final confrontation came 2 weeks later. The Kethmori fleet, battered and desperate, launched a direct assault on the Imperial capital. They expected to find a world cowering behind its defenses. Instead, they found a trap. Kalira stood on the palace balcony, watching enemy ships burn in the night sky above. Beside her, Elias coordinated defensive positions with the calm professionalism of someone who had orchestrated such operations before. Incoming dropships, Sector 7, came a voice through his comm unit, requesting immediate support. Palace. Guard 3rd Battalion, respond to Sector 7, Elias replied. Remember, they're expecting heavy resistance at the landing zones. Hit them from behind while they're focused forward. Kalira marveled at the transformation. This was her husband, both the gentleman who brought her flowers from the garden and the brilliant tactician who was systematically dismantling an invasion force. The dichotomy no longer troubled her. If anything, it made her love him more. Princess, Captain Velthara approached, her usual composed demeanor showing cracks of stress. There's been a breach in the eastern gardens. Enemy forces are moving toward the palace. How many? Elias asked, already reaching for his weapons. 50, maybe more. They're using the hedge maze for cover. Kalira saw the look that passed between her husband and the captain, a moment of perfect understanding between professionals. I'm going with you, she announced. Kalira, no, yes. Her voice carried imperial authority. This is my home, my people. I won't hide while others fight for it. What followed was the strangest battle of Kalira's life. She moved through the gardens she'd walked for years, now transformed into a battlefield, with her husband beside her. Elias fought with the deadly efficiency she'd witnessed during the assassination attempt, but now she could see the broader picture, how he positioned himself to protect her, how he coordinated with the palace guards, how he turned familiar terrain into a weapon against their enemies. When the last Kethmori soldier fell among the roses he'd once tended, Elias pulled her into his arms with desperate relief. It's over, he whispered against her hair. They're retreating from all sectors. And we're alive, she replied, marveling at the simple fact. We're alive. 6 months later, Kalira stood in the same garden, watching Elias train a group of palace guards in advanced combat techniques. Her hand rested on her still flat stomach, where new life was growing. A child who would inherit both her royal heritage and his warrior's strength. The tactical manual is almost complete, she said as he joined her. The generals are calling it revolutionary. It's just common sense, he replied, pulling her close. Use what you have, understand what you face, and never let the enemy choose. The battlefield. Is that what you did with me? She asked, tilting her head to look at him. Chose the battlefield? No. His smile was soft, content. With you, I laid down my weapons and hoped for the best. And got it, she said, kissing him gently. And got it, he agreed. Around them, the garden bloomed with new growth, flowers and vegetables growing side by side, tended by the hands of a man who had learned to nurture as skillfully as he had once destroyed. It was, Kalira thought, the perfect metaphor for their life together. Strength and gentleness, war and peace, love and duty, all of it unified in the remarkable man who had once been her simple farmer and was now so much more.